in terms of just living a normal life, just living daily living. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce Mr. Richard McCowan, who will be presenting. Richard is with the Nebraska Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and I'm very much looking forward to his comments on this. So if I can throw it to Richard.
Sorry, okay. I had to get my sip of coffee in just to make sure I'm alive and alert for my presentation here. So, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, backtracking here. This is my sign name, so it's an R from my shoulder to my wrist. I went to the deaf school, and I've been involved in the deaf community, and that's just kind of the name sign that I've had. So I feel like it's indicative of a strong boy. Back in my youth, I had good muscles and good strength, so that's how they kind of came up with my name sign. But my name is Richard, and I work for the National Association for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I'm currently the vice president of that association. And with the NAD, right now we are focused on civil rights organization for the deaf. And this is nationwide for Americans throughout the US. I guess there's a couple of assumptions, and I guess there's a couple of myths that I wanted to talk about and address today. And the first one is backtracking to what Stella, Miss Young, had said. One thing that I thought was kind of funny, but I do agree with her and think that it's true, kind of how she was explaining people's perspectives and how they objectify people with disabilities. When it comes to deaf individuals and their experience, that's something that I'm going to talk to a little bit today. In the past, I did some teaching. I used to teach deaf history. And this would be just for different communities or different colleges throughout the community where we would have discussions. And we would talk about different assumptions that people have and also different myths that people might have as well. And I want to talk about two different views today, if I could. So the first view that I'm going to mention is going to be the medical view, you could call it. That's one perspective I'm going to take. And then the other perspective, or the other view, is going to be, this is with a capital letter. So this is with a capital D for deaf, for the word deaf, but specifically focusing on the fact that it has a capital D, which means that this person identifies strongly with deaf culture, the deaf community, the deaf language, etc. And this is basically, it's how they identify. They're identifying strongly as a deaf person, which is separate from the medical view, where they just view it as a medical diagnosis, thinking that the deaf person could become hearing. And that is a common myth or an assumption, however you would like to phrase that people have. And that is a common assumption or myth that people have and medical professionals have every day. So maybe the case could be that, over in the past 400 years, specifically looking at Europe, they were originally when they started teaching deaf people the oral method when it came to education. And that's how they kind of got by with communication. And that method eventually kind of switched over to sign language, but it has not completely disappeared. Eventually, there was another one called visual communication, where people just like, as it sounds, it was very visual. It was a visual way of communicating where you could see each other. This was not always taught to all deaf people. Some deaf people, medical professionals specifically, that felt like, this is a burden for a deaf individual to have to learn a visual way of communicating. And they felt like the process itself was a burden. And it was kind of the same as what Stella was explaining, where, people say, this isn't these different achievements that you have and these different accomplishments that you have and how people notice that and we're objectifying it. It is really based on an attitude. And I want to emphasize that. The attitude could be in regards to quote unquote normal people. Maybe they're noticing something that we don't have an experience that normal people have because we're disabled. And that's what they notice first about us. And they think, well, they don't have a normal life, a normal way of living. But for people with disabilities, I mean, you kind of have to just start and get going and get that ball rolling. And we can do anything that anybody else can do, whether you're deaf, blind, maybe you have some other deformity that you're dealing with. That's just kind of a part of life. But you know, for me specifically, I'm not in any pain or anything of that nature, and I'm spiritually and mentally and physically a strong individual. So does that make me normal? Does that make me like every other person? Some people don't always take that view, and that's something that you know, it's either accepted or not accepted by certain individuals. So, and oftentimes not quite accepted by specifically medical individuals or people in the medical profession. So looking back at myths and assumptions, there's many that we could go through today. We could actually have an all-day workshop on that, but I only have 10 minutes, so I have to keep it short and find the best way I can possibly explain this. So one assumption I would like to mention is when it comes to, I guess, language specifically. Actually, let me back. Captioning. Okay, just wanted to make sure that I was using the right term for his sign choice. This is the interpreter clarifying. So the sign I saw could maybe be used for captioning, just confirming that Richard is referring to language. So thank you for that brief interruption. So looking at language and language deprivation specifically, that's actually a pretty hot issue at this time in the community. So when it comes to deaf and hard of hearing children in academics and that perspective, people are talking about language deprivation. So some deaf individuals feel like, or maybe when it comes to hearing people and their perspective, they don't quite understand the development of language deprivation, how deaf people take in language into their eyes visually and how they process that information mentally, that, you know, we bring in the language, it's conceptual, we visualize it, and it's almost kind of like as if I'm an artist, so to speak. I guess that's maybe one way you could put it. So if you were drawing and writing, let's just say you have drawing on one side, writing on the other. Deaf people would prefer drawing, for example. And that is because with art or with drawing, you are showing. So let's just say, let me give you an example. I'm going to kind of paint you a picture. So you start with your, I guess, your framework, your canvas, whatever you might be using. And then let's just say you have different objects or different colors that you're starting to put down on your piece of art. That is visual, and you can conceptualize that language versus writing where you're using words. And so it's kind of like an out of the box way of thinking. So one moment here. So if you're painting, and let's just say you're using the color red, do you mean if you are writing versus painting? So like if you're writing, so the comparison is just if you're writing language versus basically drawing language. So if you are drawing red versus writing like the word red, and then talking about how you make that conceptual and how you're swapping to give that as a demonstration of language, how it's viewed, how that perception is viewed as language. So the content and really the context is pretty much the same of what you're trying to get after, but it's a different way of looking at things. So what I'm referring to when it comes to deaf and hard of hearing individuals, when it comes to specifically, like I mentioned, academics, we are starting to see more and more deaf and hard of hearing children going into the mainstream setting versus a deaf school specifically. Many teachers are not trained or do not have appropriate training when it comes to deaf education specifically. And so that can be kind of a concern. They may have some old mindsets that need to be changed. They might have some old ideas or perceptions of how to teach or work with deaf individuals. So if we're like a deaf child, when they're looking at writing, when they're looking at their English skills, they may see a different perspective when it comes to the deaf child and how they're viewing English and writing and language. And oftentimes teachers are not aware of that because deaf children are looking around the building, they're looking around for visual information, they're using their eyes to take in that information. When it comes to hearing people, oftentimes you may look at the actual language, the actual words, the grammar, and then that's how you take in that information. So that's one difference that's important to notice. Another thing that I want to mention, and this is basically trying to give you like a story or an anecdote here, but working for the newspaper, for example, I actually have one large publisher, and they have like two different, can I clarify what you, oh, it's the name of the machine is just a paste. It's a paste setting, basically. So it's a machine, or it's a piece of equipment that they're using to put the ink basically onto the paper for the newspaper itself, or whatever they're publishing or printing. So that machine had actually broken down or was not functioning. And there was a gentleman, there was a hearing guy, and he was looking at the manual. So he gets this manual, this big, huge, thick manual. He's looking through it. He's looking at the machine, trying to figure out how to fix it. He cannot get it to work. He can't figure out what's going on. He's looking through the manual, and he's just saying, I can't figure out what's going on. But a deaf individual, or someone who is at least visual, they can look at that machine and they can instantly, or almost instantly, point out and go, this is wrong. So there was a deaf person that came and said they're trying to indicate that they have found the problem. They're pointing, and the hearing guy keeps saying, no, that's not it. And the deaf person is saying, no, this is it, because they're so visual that they're just quickly keen on noticing what the issue is. So the guy keeps going back to the manual, can't find the issue, and they're kind of just having this back and forth, so to speak. And eventually, I guess when all was said and done, it turns out that the deaf guy or the deaf individual was correct. But however, the deaf person, the writing skills just weren't there to really communicate. And that was one, I guess, issue or barrier. So sometimes, like when deaf individuals, maybe they're going to school, and oftentimes if they're going to, let's just say, be a mechanic, oftentimes they can get through some of those programs without even looking at manuals or the written language, just because visually they are so, I guess, talented, I guess you could say, or that's just their natural ability, is to take things in visually. And oftentimes deaf people may struggle, like hearing people may have the perception because deaf people can't write, it means that they're not intelligent. That's another myth and assumption that many people have. So which is not true. It's just that we take in things visually. So if you guys have any further questions, I know I have to keep it short. I'd be happy to take any more questions you guys might have later on, and be happy to answer those the best that I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That was outstanding. I greatly appreciate your perspective on this. I apologize for not introducing you appropriately. I think you are, we would say you in Nebraska, but obviously you're at the national level. And I really thought you brought out some great points in terms of some of the struggles that we see, not only with the public perception of deaf culture, but some of the discussions and issues within deaf culture, as far as people's choices, how they interact with the world, how they interact with each other. So that was really excellent. Thanks very much. Our next presenters is going to be a couple I want to introduce Travis Schaefer and Hannah Mercer. You can go ahead and start your camera, Travis. There you are. Great.
I need you to unmute, or you got it.
Okay, we got it.
Hello.
Hi.
Travis, one of the assumptions that we're addressing today as part of this presentation is the fact that if you identify as an individual with a disability, that for whatever reason, that means that you really shouldn't be in a relationship with a committed partner, whether that's a wife, a girlfriend, whatever the case may be. And I think some of that goes back to the myth that people with identified disabilities are not mature enough or are childlike. And we know that this is well, I'm not going to say what Ms. Young said, but it comes out of the wrong end of the bowl. So in any case, we're going to have a conversation with Travis Schaefer and Hannah Mercer, who are both members of People First of Nebraska, and just happen to be, well, I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit and talk about what they, who they are and what they do.
Alrighty. Well, my name is Travis Schaefer. The way Hannah and I met was we were at a leadership conference 5 5 years ago
Yes.
in the end of October,
No.
or August. Yeah, August. We kind of just sat together because we were both from Nebraska. There was Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, and the 4 bordering states. I can't
Yeah,
remember the
what?
last one.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we were both from Nebraska, so we sat next to each other and started talking to each other, and Hannah wants to go now.
Okay. I'm Hannah Mercer, and I live in Kearney, Nebraska. And like Travis said, we met about 5 years ago. It's gonna be 5 years this year at the end of August, and it was really hard because at first because he lived in Norfolk and I lived here, and it was really hard to get to know him better because we were so far apart. And I finally got him to come and live in Kearney. His roommate had passed away, unfortunately, and he had to move back in with his parents, and it took a while, but we made it work. And what else? What is it?
So you've been together.
Can
Go
you
ahead.
help us out?
None of us drive, so we
Oh,
have
that's
to
right, yes.
rely on
That's-
public transportation.
That is,
to,
yeah, that's a big issue. We do have services, but because of this virus, it has been very hard to get transportation. Staff are not allowed to drive this place. Those were taken away. Travis kind of had to rely on me and my parents, but he made it work, and we are getting back into Goodwill services, but we still aren't allowed to go like in big public places that we usually do, and we're not making an income. So, and we're based at a income based union or housing. Thank you.
Authority.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
the Kearney Manor, and so how our rent is they go based on how much you're making. And so since none of us really have a job yet, or I'm still waiting to get on the voc rehab so I can get funding for a job. And I've been on the waiting list since I moved down here.
With almost 2 years, or actually 2 years.
So
Yeah.
it's been 2 years, almost, yeah, a little over 2 years ago now that I moved down here. So I don't have a job yet, but I'm getting closer to getting that funding, so then I can get a job and start earning money for myself instead of having to just rely on my SSI check that I get every month. Some months it's not enough.
No.
I like to spend money, unfortunately.
I try to remind him as much as possible. When I see him on Amazon, I said, Travis, what's going on? What are you buying now?
But yeah, it's just constant being reminded of through Hannah or myself, just not to go crazy on spending on
Travis, could you please repeat that? Your voice
You're out
voice
of
is
a month.
breaking up.
I don't want to let. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do what?
Repeat what I said. I don't know where it cut out at.
That's me, right?
Yeah.
Just say the last two sentences.
Oh, I was just saying that I'm.
I think we're losing him.
Travis, I'm going to ask Travis. I'm going to ask you to turn off your video so that we can understand what you're saying, please.
Can you understand me now?
Yes.
Much better, Travis.
So, I've but I have a little should be spending in a month. So she's keeping me in line on that. Because I just like to spend money. And I don't have a job right now. I'm relying on SSI, the checks that I get, and that's what, $600 a month or whatever it is. So close to that anyways. So it's hard to live on that. But
So Travis, so what I kind of heard you and Hannah saying a few minutes ago was that you guys kind of work together to plan not only what you do in terms of your spending from day to day, but it sounds like you're also kind of working together to plan for your future. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Yes.
well, we are, excuse me, we are wanting to get married here. As soon as this virus is over, so we can have like a more public wedding and not over Zoom, which would be really horrible. So we was kind of waiting for that to or at least with the majority of the virus. I mean, I don't know. I mean, hopefully the virus is over or the scare is over fairly soon. I wouldn't imagine it lasting much longer into the next year, but who knows. But yeah, we've been trying to wait off until this virus is over before we get married. Do you have anything else to say, Anna?
Mark, can you help me out?
Well, it sounds like you've got plans for your relationship. It sounds like you've got plans for your jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as like home stuff at home, like I cook for us, but I won't, because I have a seizure disorder. I don't really like using the stove that much, because some days are better than others, and yesterday I couldn't do much because my vision was giving me problems, and this last big thing that
You broke up on just the end of your sentence. Hannah.
And my nasal passage, they had to.
What?
Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So do you feel like that you have, this is just I guess, what would you say to somebody who said, well, if you're getting services and getting SSI and things like that, that you shouldn't be in a relationship? What would your answer be? And we might have lost them. I think we
I
lost them.
think we did.
Well, let's give them a second and see if they come back on before we move on. I guess,
They went on mute. I'm unmuting them.
okay. One thing I'll say as Mary does that is I'm hearing Travis and Hannah speak, and I'm not hearing a lot different than I think I would hear from any committed couple or any married couple for that matter, in terms of the back and forth and planning for their lives and you know, working together and you know, and so the whole concept of disability and relationships, you know, as being not compatible, I hope that they're kind of exploding that myth for you. Do we have them back on?
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We didn't see the message that Mary was sending us.
Yeah, we just got muted for some reason. I'm not sure how
I
or
didn't
why.
know.
We didn't do it.
I didn't do it.
It's been that kind of week, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like I'm sure I've asked Travis as well, like, that, you know, do people make fun of him ever, or just stare at him, or, you know, because of course his is physical, and you can see that he has a disability. But if I were to come up and say hi, you wouldn't even know there was anything wrong with me, or which there isn't anything wrong with me. It's just we're just different. And if everybody was the same in this world, it would be so boring.
Yeah.
But like in the past, I had boyfriends, and then I tell them that I have a disability and this is what I have. I don't want anything to do with it, which is very sad. And it kind of makes me emotional. But I found the right person.
Hannah, is it possible for you to put this in the chat? We are missing whole sentences.
To put it on chat.
Yeah, we're sorry. I don't know what's going on.
Mark, can you hear us?
That's okay. I just really want folks that are on the call to, number one, be appreciative of the fact that Travis and Hannah are being very straight with us in terms of letting us kind of take a look at their lives as a couple. And again, as I said earlier, I think this whole idea of disability and having committed relationships being incompatible, we're seeing an example where this isn't the case. That with supports and people have a right to and are able to live lives as they choose. And so Travis and Hannah have chosen to do that together, and I think that's awfully cool. Do you have anything you want to finish with, guys, or are you good?
I would just probably say Just for anyone that has a disability and wants to be in a relationship, I would just say go for it. I mean,
I also want to add that my mom always told me that deep down everybody has a disability. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be mental. But there is something that everybody has something that they are not capable of doing by themselves or doing it very well. And so that really helps to know that from my mom.
Excuse me, Mark. Richard would like to know what PWD stands for.
What? I'm sorry?
Richard wants to know what PWD stands for. Melly just did.
Person with a disability.
There were some comments in the chat box, first for the earlier presenter, but also, well, one of them said if somebody tried to tell you you couldn't get married because you have a disability, he would give them the bird.
I agreed with that.
Yes. And then Jamie said, I'm so pleased that you shared your story. Melanie said people with disabilities are often shielded from the processes in which people take to have the typical aspects of life. Very often it is made out to be difficult for a person with disabilities. Kristen, Travis, and Hannah are a wonderful couple and great examples of living in a truly inclusive life as a couple in their communities. And Jamie says, Hannah, say it's Hannah right on. And let's see, Kim says, so true, Hannah. One of the disabilities for many is being signing impaired, LOL. Most of us are signing impaired, I've had. Richard says, yeah, same thing. Deaf people cannot get married. Wrong.
Yeah. That's not true.
Uh-uh.
All right. Well,
thank you.
I want to say thanks to Travis and Hannah. That was great, guys.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure doing this for you guys.
I'm sorry. Oh, we greatly appreciate it. Let's go ahead and move on. Our last speaker for the, I guess for the week, is Dr. Eric Evans. I can introduce Eric, I think, successfully. Eric is the Executive Director of Disability Rights Nebraska. I can tell you that Eric has a long history of working to try and break down the myths and assumptions and stereotypes around disabilities. And so at this point, I will open it up to Eric.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here, Eric.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. The video with Stella Young was very, very powerful. I think that if we look at the history, we see that her claim that we have been lied to about disability, that it is a bad thing, is true. I think part of that goes back 2,400 years when the ancient Greeks had the ideal of perfection as being the most perfect of human good. So when you start from that assumption, you then create a lot of myths and attitudes about people with disability that's very hard to dispel. And they've been with us for millennia. One of the things that I think's been a real great benefit of the position that I have is I get to work with people like Mark, Mary, and Kathy, and Edison, and Kristen, and a whole range of other folks around leadership education. And my piece of that educational effort has been on the history and philosophy of disabilities. So I think, again, when we look over time, are things as bad as they were, 500 years ago? No. But that doesn't mean we don't have a long way to go 500 years later. The point that, again, Stella makes is that the attitudes and assumptions and myths that we still have about people with disability get played out every day. When I started in the field almost 50 years ago, it was at the time when we were just beginning to create opportunities for people with disabilities to live in what were called integrated community settings. And the idea of integration was a powerful idea. It was part of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And we fought for integration up until 1990, when we finally were able to secure passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was a very powerful statement to be able to pass a civil rights law that was specifically focused on people with disabilities and their rights. But that's only a small part of what needs to happen. The reality is you can't legislate change in attitudes. I mean, a law like the Americans with Disabilities Act is very, very helpful, but that's not going to change attitudes. And that's where the work of advocates really comes into play. We have to change not only the prejudice and discrimination that exist, but we have to be able to support people with disabilities coming forward and telling their own stories in powerful ways, like we've already seen today. So I want to take a moment and reflect on the Americans with Disabilities Act, since this is the 30th anniversary of that law. And I remember that time in Nebraska was a time of significant activity and change. Starting in 1987 and going up and through 1988, 1989, there was a group of folks that had come together, first convened by the governor, to address reforming the mental retardation service system and creating instead a developmental disabilities service system. And today we talk about an intellectual and developmental disabilities service system. That actually resulted in, after the work of the governor's group was done, the formation of what was called the Nebraska Legislative Coalition for Developmental Disabilities in 1989. And at that time, that group had as its goal designing legislation and securing the passage of legislation to transform the system of services for people with developmental disabilities. And we got part of the way there. There were a number of bills that were introduced. Eventually, several of them, some of the more important ones around creating a career ladder and a system of in-service and continuing education for staff working in developmental disabilities. That got dropped by the wayside. There were bills to create initially an independent service coordination system. That got dropped, and that became an activity and function of the state. So even though there were a lot of very creative ideas that were happening at that time, being able to really get them through the legislature was a challenge. So my point here is that there's a lot of activity going on at that time that was political and policy related on the developmental disability side. In 1990, we were able to introduce a legislation and have passed a Developmental Disability Services Act. But that was also a time when, in 1989 and 1990, there was a lot of effort at the federal level to create the Americans with Disabilities Act. And because of the position that I had earlier as director of the Developmental Disabilities Council, and then coming to what was then Nebraska Advocacy Services, and being responsible for governmental affairs activities within that organization, I was involved in creating in moving forward with the Nebraska Legislative Coalition on Developmental Disabilities and creating the Nebraska Consortium on for Citizens with Disabilities. So that was happening right at the same time that here in Nebraska, that the national effort to pass the AD, the Americans with Disabilities Act was going on. And what happened is that I happened to be somebody who Senator Exxon knew, who was active on the disability, in the disability policy field. And Senator Harkin had asked, who was a sponsor of the bill, had asked Senator Exxon, who in Nebraska might be somebody to contact around the Americans with Disabilities Act. And Senator Harkin gave that information to this guy that I'd never heard of, Justin Dart. So at one point in 1989, I got a call from Justin Dart saying that he was involved with forming this Justice for All group. And the purpose of the Justice for All group was to advocate for the, to be a national advocacy voice for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and asked if I would be willing to coordinate activities going on at the local level and disseminate information to other advocacy organizations in Nebraska at the time. So I said, sure, sounds great, why not? And that allowed me to have a number of opportunities to interact with Justin Dart and his wonderful wife, Yoshiko Dart, and be able to pass along the information from Justice for All to the other advocacy organizations in Nebraska who would have interest in this. And it was a wonderful experience. I never got to meet Justin Dart personally, and that's a great regret. But you know, we were on frequent conference calls with all the other people across the United States who were coordinating the Justice for All campaigns in their states. So it was a very, very powerful time. Because of Justin Dart's relationship, in large part, his relationship with President George H.W. Bush, he was very, very successful in moving that legislation forward. He had very strong partners in the Senate and the House, also working on the legislation. And it was a masterful job that he was able to do. There's been a lot of work in terms of interpreting what the promise of the ADA really is. And we're still doing that. At Disability Rights Nebraska, we're still working to answer the question, what does the integration mandate under the Olmstead decision of the Supreme Court in terms of the Americans with Disabilities Act integration mandate really mean here in Nebraska? What's the promise? And I think we've moved from a promise of integration, which is probably the weakest promise, that, yeah, you can live in the community with other folks. And yeah, you can, have opportunities to interact in the community with other folks. But now, and really as a result of the Olmstead Act and the passage and reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we're talking about full inclusion of people with disabilities in the lives of their communities. And this is the real promise, to be fully included. And to be able to do that, it comes back to the point that Stella Young made. And that is that we have to change those deep-seated myths and assumptions and attitudes. And that's going on. We're seeing that all over. All we have to do is log on to the internet and click onto the YouTube videos, and we'll see very, very powerful examples of people who are breaking down those myths, who are making sure that those attitudes that have been part of our Western civilization for millennia are starting to crumble. And we are truly, I think, at a point where the promise that Mark alluded to earlier, that's in that founding document of our country, that promise of life, liberty, and the able to pursue happiness for each and every individual, is more open than it's ever been. But as COVID-19 has shown us, we have to be very, very vigilant, because at the outset of the pandemic, we saw that there were states who had guidelines for the use, for accessing the use of ventilators that basically said if you were a person with a severe disability, you weren't going to get a ventilator. This is what Dr. Wolfensberger referred to as death making. So we have to be very, very vigilant and watchful. As it says on our state capitol, watchfulness of the citizen is the salvation of the state. So for us, it's watchfulness of advocates is what will guard against the state doing very, very horrible and bad things to people with disabilities. We are fortunate in Nebraska that we did not have such policies in place. But there are still many things that are left to do. And because of the work of the people who have been working on this for as long as I have, I'm hopeful that our future can only get better. So thank you for this opportunity to talk today. Mark?
There have been a couple of comments.
Go ahead, Mary.
Carlos says disabled people would not be here without protesting. Also have disabled people make book, movie, TV shows, video games, as well as music. Melanie says, I have seen in my own life that I have often had to create my own platform for telling my story. Very often people are resistant to creating that platform. But the reality is that disability needs to be discussed in every aspect of life. A good example of this would be people with disabilities have been greatly left out of during this pandemic, as you just said. Specifically, how our social interactions have shifted. Rant over. Travis has given us his website, and Kim said that Senator Hawkins was from Iowa. He had a deaf brother, hence is how he promoted the ADA for all of us. Carla wants you to know he's writing a new book. Kim says we are so grateful, fortunate to have Disability Rights Nebraska and all you do.
Thanks, Mary. I hope as you've listened, you've just caught this is just a thumbnail glimpse in terms of the Stella Young video, in terms of Richard's comments about the deaf community, about Travis and Hannah, and talking about kind of their day-to-day life as a couple and their plans for the future and what that portends, and Eric's always insightful comments about going really back to why we're here, talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act and what that's portended for people with disabilities in this country. I'll make a couple comments and then I'll throw it open for a few questions if you like. The one thing that I would want to say, as I've heard people talk and that I want to, that's really a core to my life, is that my son and my sister, irrespective of their disabilities, they're people, and they're more alike us, the typical individual, than they are unlike. And if you disagree with me on that, I'll be happy to meet you somewhere and we can talk it through. But they're just, as Eric said, challenges remain, and ever vigilant are the critical pieces. And finally, I would say that, again, myths and assumptions are such a critical issue, because if anything has held back this opportunity for community inclusion and participation, it's been the stereotyping of people with disabilities and the misbeliefs that are out there. I'll remind you that the first line of the ADA, if I remember correctly, is disability is a natural part of the human condition. And I believe that. So with that, if there are questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask one of our presenters. We have a few minutes. So don't be shy.
Melanie says change never stops. We cannot think that there is an end in sight. Sorry, not a question. I'm putting in the chat box that you can unmute yourselves if you don't see it. Go ahead and question.
I think that's an excellent comment by Melanie. It's like we're not swimming in a pond, we're swimming in a river. And if we stop paddling, we're going the wrong direction. So yeah, change is a never-ending process. And that's true for any social movement in our country, as we've seen over the years.
Mark, Richard has his mic off and Hannah will be voicing for him.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, again, this is Richard here. Just real quick, kind of a comment / story. And this is just another, going back to deaf and hard of hearing individuals, referring back to children and academics in the school setting here. It's kind of like when you have quote unquote normal people that look at them specifically and they almost kind of feel pity, or they feel like they kind of feel sad, maybe some sympathy, because they are looking at that perspective. They look at the other quote unquote normal people, normal attitudes, so to speak, and they feel like that the deaf and hard of hearing children maybe aren't having that positive experience. They feel like almost it's a missed opportunity or a missed experience that the deaf and hard of hearing children are having in the school. So we have to look at how to manage that. We have to teach normal people, you know, how do you look at yourselves and how do you look at other people? You know, what's your view, what's their view, and help them understand and kind of self-analyze, you know, where their attitude is coming from, where their biases are coming from, so they can start to recognize that and realize that it's a problem. And it's not so much that the deaf or that the hard of hearing children have the issue themselves, but really the problem is stemming from an attitude or a perception that needs to be changed within the system or within the society. And that definitely, I think it really starts with school. It starts with children being brought up in the academic process, and then they carry that into adult life. So that's just my opinion, though. I wanted to share that.
I think that's so right, Richard. You know, one of the myths of brokenness that somehow people with a disability, irrespective of the disability, have something wrong with them. They're broken. They need to be fixed. You know, that all our energy needs to be put towards fixing that disability is it's just such a stereotyped way of looking at the world. Everyone needs supports. We all need individualized supports. And I would contend that people that identify as having a disability need individualized supports. It's just a matter of degree at worst. So thank you for that, Richard.
Earlier, Kim said to everyone after Richard's speech was over, Alexander Graham Bell advocated for a ban in marriage between deaf couples to prevent births of more deaf babies. And I think Eric could affirm that that happened with many groups.
And I think I said something along the lines of, oh, for Pete's sake.
Yes, you did.
Others?
And Emily has asked Travis and Travis and Hannah, what part of marriage are you most excited for? Travis, if you'd like to take off your mute button.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Not really sure what the most excited for. Probably just, I don't know.
Well, even way before we even talked about marriage, what I said, Travis, you know, we're gonna have our marriage pool. Because that's what my thought is. It would be really fun to have it in a pool.
Okay.
So the big question there is, Travis and Hannah, is who do you want to spend the rest of your life with?
Well, yeah. And that's
With each other.
with each other.
Work as a team.
Working as a team and just
Making our lives the
being
best.
there for each other when one person can't do something to the best of their ability, the other one can step in and help with whatever it may be.
Travis is always helping me.
Whether it be cooking or cleaning or household chores or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Just living as the fullest to what we can for our lives together.
Mark, Jamie says that what you said is so true. Individual supports is what we all need.
Okay, in order to kind of get us finished, I really again want to thank Richard, Hannah, Hannah and her guy. Sorry, it's late on Friday. Travis, thank you, Travis.
It's all right.
That's all right.
Travis and Eric for their really thoughtful remarks. if I was going to try and, I don't think I could plan this better because, again, this is just an issue I feel so strongly about that it's attitudes that are really, if not the greatest barrier, one of the greatest barrier to truly inclusive communities. So thank you, guys, and thank you to the audience. I'm going to do the big handoff here. We've been doing this for 5 days, and to finish us up for our ADA celebration presentations, I'm going to hand the ball over to Miss Kathy Hall. Again, thank you. Thanks for your attention. We've had such a great turnout for this. I just don't see how it could be a better indication of how of the disability community coming together around the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So thank you.
Thank you.
Briefly, Kristen says, thanks to all the presenters. Richard, I learned so much from your insight about the deaf culture. Hannah and Travis are a delight. Eric Evans is a pioneer in advocacy.
Well, it's been an interesting week. When we first decided to hold a virtual ADA celebration over 5 days, I imagined that we'd get maybe 2 people every day. And you totally blown my socks off.
Richard saying, well, thank you so much. Just wanted to comment. Thank you for getting that established, and thank you to the interpreters as well. We appreciate you guys.
I'm glad you guys could do it. And we tried to make this accessible. We wanted people to realize that there are people, there were the pioneers of the ADA who worked hard. There was Jill who just wrote a letter to Justin Dart back in 89, 88, somewhere in that vicinity. And the people like Eric, who was doing stuff on in Nebraska to make it happen. I didn't move to Nebraska till 1990. Actually, when the ADA was being signed, I was driving across the country. But the thing is, every person who was involved with the ADA, they did a little piece. And we've had the ADA. There are people on this call that were born when there was only an ADA. And they don't always have the information about how much work went into it. And I would like to encourage everybody that's on this call to do whatever they can to promote our rights, to advocate for what we need to have happen, whether it's writing a letter to your senator, or what I did, I wrote a letter to my mayor of the town I live in. You can do anything you want to do. And we just need to get people involved. And they need to be talking to each other. I don't know if this is ever going to happen again. Actually, I'm kind of hoping it does. This has been really fun. I really enjoyed all of you being here. I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to also apologize for our little episodes we've had throughout the week that made life interesting. And this is the ADA turning 30 is such a big deal. And it's something we've got, it comes back to us as people with disabilities. We have to continue advocating for change, for changing attitudes. We can't give up on it now. Thank you very much.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say, put out a large thanks and kudos to Kathy for her tireless efforts and leadership in making this week happen. Thank you, Kathy. You rocked it.
Well, no, everybody here rocked it. You made it happen. Because my initial thought was it was only going to be 2 people here.
I was just gonna add one more thing here. If anyone has a comment on with my website, please feel free to leave a comment or leave the comments. I mean, I'm wanting to hear from people, so please leave a comment.
Yeah, Travis's website is in the chat.
Yes, it is. It's in the chat.
And starting next week, we'll try to get all the videos organized and so we can share them, because our video for Wednesday ended up in 2 pieces and we have to cut out a bunch of stuff because of the way the events of that day. So, but we talked about some really important issues: community inclusion, employment, education, intersectionality, and assumptions and myths. And not any one of them is not important. They're all important. Anyway, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. This is
For
Jill
hosting.
Fleck.
Yes.
Thank you, Jill, for presenting on Monday.
My pleasure.
Hey,
Yeah,
well,
thank you, all the presenters. It was really fun to hear from everyone.
Hey, thanks, Kathy, and all the other collaborators. This really was a really neat week. I really had a great time.
So did I, so thank you.
okay, well, I think it's Miller time. And
Well, can I have wine?
absolutely.
Michelle here, but I will see you all later, hopefully. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Amber and Hannah.
What was that, Kathy?
I'm here, Kathy.
I was just gonna tell Amber and Hannah, I appreciate them being here all week. And
It was our pleasure.
I want to thank you for being our interpreters for our maiden voyage here doing this.
I think it was great. I learned a lot. It was really a pleasure to work with you all.
Well, thank you.
Our captioner was very good too.
Kelly, I also want to thank you for captioning part of the week, and then share Chris, and we appreciate her also.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well.
All right. Everybody have a good weekend. Be safe.